the fire that confuses across various traditions. One specific metaphor appears with striking regularity, and that is the concept of the inner fire. Yogic texts describe a process of awakening where a flame ascends the spine, while Tibetan practitioners generate enough physical heat to melt snow on their bare skin. Even Christian mystics speak of a burning transformation, suggesting that while the sensation feels universal, the actual practices are quite different. Many people use these terms interchangeably because they assume all inner fire works in exactly the same way. The result is that they mix methods and chase intensity, only to wonder why their progress feels chaotic rather than clarifying. It is a mistake to think all fire is meant to rise, as some fire is intended to warm, strengthen, and stabilize the practitioner. This video clarifies three distinct concepts that are often conflated, which are Kundalini, Tummo, and inner fire itself. Each of these serves a different function and requires specific conditions to be effective. Using the wrong method for the wrong goal creates internal instability rather than the transformation you seek. Inner fire, the experience, not the method. Inner fire is not a practice in itself, but rather a description of a specific state. The term refers to a felt sensation of intensity, heat, or energetic arousal that appears across multiple contexts. This experience can be generated by different causes and serves various purposes depending on the tradition. A runner might feel this inner fire during physical exertion, just as a meditator feels it during deep concentration. A practitioner, using specific breath techniques, feels it through deliberate metabolic activation, yet the sensation itself reveals nothing about which system produced it. Cultures develop distinct methods to work with this experience, with some traditions cultivating heat for survival in extreme cold. Other systems use the sensation as feedback for integrating awareness along the central axis of the body. Confusion arises when people treat the sensation as the ultimate goal rather than understanding what each method actually does. Two primary systems generate what is commonly called inner fire, which are Tummo from the Tibetan traditions and Kundalini from yogic frameworks. Tummo focuses on producing and sustaining physical heat, whereas Kundalini focuses on the integration and coherence of awareness. These are not variations of the same practice, as they operate on different axes and require entirely different forms of preparation. To understand why confusing these leads to problems, we must examine the specific mechanics of each system. Tummo, horizontal amplification of metabolic heat. The primary objective of Tummo is the generation and maintenance of physical heat through a combination of breath and visualization. This method utilizes vigorous breathing patterns, specific muscular contractions, and a focused mental image to produce a measurable warmth that spreads horizontally across the physical frame. We must understand that this is not a metaphor, as the heat produced is a real and detectable manifestation of physiological change. The biological mechanism behind this process is quite straightforward, because strong breathing directly activates the sympathetic nervous system. This activation increases metabolic output, and the body generates heat as a natural byproduct of heightened cellular activity. It will be noticed that Tummo works because these breathing patterns fundamentally alter metabolism, rather than relying on any form of mystical fire. Traditional Tibetan systems develop this practice deliberately to allow practitioners to maintain their body temperature in conditions that would otherwise result in hypothermia. This technique served the practical needs of survival and resilience while acting as a clear demonstration of mastery over one's own physiological processes. What Tummo trains is the capacity to generate heat on demand and the strength to sustain intense metabolic states without a total collapse of the system. However, we must be clear about what Tummo does not do, as it does not reorganize consciousness or produce a vertical integration of awareness. The practice is designed to amplify intensity, but it does not resolve internal conflicts or create a sense of coherence between different levels of human consciousness. This distinction becomes vital when individuals misapply the method and expect results the practice was never intended to provide. When a person performs these strong breaths and contractions expecting a spiritual awakening, they often find themselves in a state of over-arousal. They increase their sympathetic activation and generate physical heat, yet the result is often agitation, difficult sleep, and increased emotional volatility. Many interpret these symptoms as spiritual progress or the clearing of energetic blockages, but the reality is that they have simply increased intensity without any corresponding integration. The nervous system becomes overburdened because the body is producing heat it was never asked to regulate, and the system lacks the capacity to process what has been activated. Tummo holds significant value within its proper context of physical resilience and metabolic training under specific conditions. The error occurs only when it is used as a tool for a transformation that it was never designed to facilitate. While Tummo amplifies heat horizontally across the body, Kundalini operates upon an entirely different axis. Kundalini vertical integration of awareness. The primary goal of Kundalini is the integration and coherence of awareness along the central axis of the human frame. This method emphasizes a foundation of preparation, balance, and careful regulation, where progress occurs slowly as the nervous system builds the capacity to maintain stability. The biological requirement for this process is a balanced autonomic nervous system and a high interoceptive capacity, which is the ability to sense internal states without becoming overwhelmed by them. It is a common misconception that Kundalini is limited by a lack of energy, when in fact it is limited strictly by the power of regulation. Classical yogic frameworks treated this process as a method for removing internal conflict, allowing the system to reorganize itself only when the proper conditions were met. Forcing this process before the nervous system is ready creates a profound instability that hinders true progress. What Kundalini addresses is the state of internal coherence, working to eliminate the contradictions that exist between different levels of our awareness. It increases the ability of the nervous system to process sensation without fragmentation, effectively integrating parts of the self that were previously kept in separate compartments. We must understand that Kundalini is not a technique for power generation or a method for seeking out dramatic, fleeting experiences. The intensity that many people associate with Kundalini often stems from internal resistance rather than actual progress. When the system encounters material it cannot process or lacks sufficient regulation, the sensation becomes uncomfortable because the nervous system lacks the bandwidth to integrate the energy. This distinction is essential because many seekers misapply their expectations and abandon the work when it does not produce a spectacle. A practitioner might engage in grounding practices and work with subtle awareness, maintaining a perfect balance that results in a gradual increase in sensitivity. Because they feel calm and nothing dramatic occurs, they often conclude that nothing is happening within their system. In reality, the system was reorganizing itself with quiet efficiency, as integration does not announce its arrival with fireworks or sudden surges. Coherence develops through the steady repetition of stable states rather than through peak experiences or temporary flashes of insight. The individual who expects heat, visions, or energetic surges often misses the actual work that is occurring deep within their nervous system. They abandon a practice that was functioning correctly simply because it did not provide the specific sensations they were chasing. Kundalini finds its true value in the sustainable transformation of awareness, and the error lies in treating it as a method for generating an intensity it was never meant to produce. The category error. Why mixing methods backfires? The central confusion in these practices stems from a simple mistake, where people chase the sensation of fire without understanding which specific fire they actually need. One practice focuses on integrating the self from top to bottom, while the other aims to amplify energy across the entire physical form. Kundalini operates strictly on a vertical axis by organizing awareness along the central channel of the spine, whereas Tummo works on a horizontal plane to spread metabolic heat throughout the body. These two systems are not complementary in the way most practitioners assume, and they actually require entirely different states within the nervous system to function. It is common to see someone alternate intense breathing with subtle awareness practices, perhaps doing heavy breath work one day and grounding work the next, under the false assumption that both paths lead to the same destination. This approach fails because the nervous system receives conflicting instructions that it cannot reconcile. Tummo is designed to activate the sympathetic system, which increases arousal and metabolic output to create a state of high intensity. Kundalini requires a delicate autonomic balance, as it depends on the ability of the nervous system to remain regulated while processing heightened levels of sensitivity. When these are mixed, the result is a constant oscillation between over-arousal and total collapse. The practitioner often feels wired and then suddenly exhausted, finding that their concentration slips and their emotional regulation begins to deteriorate. Sleep becomes disrupted during this process. Yet many people interpret these negative symptoms as signs of spiritual progress or energetic blockages. The physiological contradiction is straightforward, as sympathetic activation directly opposes the autonomic balance required for true integration. This matters because intensity does not equal progress when you are doing integration work. The sensation of heat or energetic arousal feels significant and captures your attention, creating the impression that something important is occurring within the body. However, intensity without proper regulation produces instability rather than lasting transformation. If you are new to these arts, you must start with regulation and grounding instead of seeking heat or force. The proper sequencing of these methods is clear, and you should choose the path that matches your actual goal rather than the sensation you are chasing. If the goal is resilience or metabolic training, Tummo serves that function well. But if the goal is coherence and the transformation of awareness, Kundalini addresses that need. Mixing them does not accelerate your progress, but instead creates a nervous system conflict that must be resolved before any real practice can proceed. In conclusion, choose the right fire. Kundalini integrates awareness, while Tummo generates heat. Yet the experience of inner fire is the phenomenon people constantly confuse for both. This confusion around inner fire comes from applying the right intensity toward the wrong goal. You must choose the method that matches the outcome you want rather than the sensation you are currently chasing. This is not a guide on how to perform these techniques, but rather a guide on how to choose between them. Until next time, keep breathing.